Ethan Carter hurriedly left the banquet, and only then did I realize he was keeping a mistress. The 19-year-old girl was Emily Shen, and she had already been with him. 2 years later, she gave Ethan a son and received a set of jewelry worth tens of millions. 4 years after that, she gave him a daughter and got a promise that they would never part. From then on, the two of them had both a son and a daughter, while I, Sawyer, was kept in the dark from beginning to end. On the day everything was finally exposed, I stood at the door of the room where they had arranged to meet and cut off Ethan as he whispered sweet nothings to Emily. "Is the next step to bring her into our home?" I asked. "Yes," he answered evenly, handing me a divorce agreement. "Sign it. I want to give her a proper place. Don't all lovers want to end up together?" But why should I let them have it easy? When a paparazzo sent me a video of Ethan picking up his illegitimate son after school, I had just coaxed my daughter, Grace, to sleep. Aside from the photos, the email contained only one line. "Mrs. Carter, I'm not asking for much, just $3 million. You can definitely afford it." I couldn't help but laugh. Paying money to clean up after my husband to preserve a marriage? That was something I would never do. A rotten marriage doesn't need to be covered up. I ignored the message until late at night. The paparazzo must have gotten anxious, because he sent another email. "Miss Sawyer, I know your company is currently bidding on a government contract. If your marriage runs into trouble, that probably won't be good, right?" I replied calmly, "Go ahead and try." I wasn't afraid of angering him. In fact, this was exactly the outcome I wanted. Since Ethan had done something like that, he deserved to be exposed and nailed to the pillar of shame forever. No one is worth my compromise. If it isn't good enough, throw it away. At some point, Grace woke up and stared at me with wide eyes. "Mom, you're still not asleep?" I stroked her head. "Did I wake you? I'm sorry, sweetheart." Grace shook her head. "I just couldn't sleep. Mom, I'm 10. I know what's going on. You don't need to hide it from me." Looking straight at me, she said, "I know you already know." I froze for a moment, then pulled her into my arms. A wave of pain surged through me, and guilt consumed me. In truth, ever since her homeroom teacher had called to say Grace had been distracted lately and asked if I wanted to take her out of school for a while, I knew she already understood what was happening with Ethan. I had considered it, but I didn't know how to bring it up to her. I can handle anything that happens to me. I have confidence I can get through it, but I don't want my daughter, at such a young age, to experience her father's betrayal. It's too cruel. I can't bear it. "Mom, I'm your child," Grace said, holding my hand. "The proudest thing in my life is being your daughter. I can accept anything, but I don't want to be separated from you." I pulled her close and stopped talking, because I understood what she meant. She was choosing me over Ethan. In her own way, she was telling me that if I divorced him, she would choose me. "Mom, I'll love you forever." Grace fell asleep in my arms. I gently laid her on the bed. I was about to turn off the light and leave when I received a text message. "You still don't plan to divorce? Don't tell me you're really waiting to be kicked out." Old hag. I set the phone down and nearly laughed. It was sent by Emily Shen's assistant. I had never met him and knew nothing about him, but at that moment, it was clear he was nothing more than a fool. Finding out that Ethan had an illegitimate child was an accident. Last month, I had gone abroad on a business trip and sent Grace to my parents' house. The cooperation was complicated, and I expected to stay in France for at least a month. Unexpectedly, things took a sudden turn. I managed to settle the entire collaboration in just 1 week and boarded a flight back home. Everything happened so abruptly. When I walked into the Carter family's old estate, I saw a child running around the osmanthus tree in the garden. I froze for a moment, thinking there must be guests in the house and that this was a child they had brought along. But before long, the boy suddenly tripped and fell. Before I could go over to help him up, he burst into tears, crying loudly for his grandma. Ethan's mother and the housemaid rushed out from the living room. The maid helped the child to his feet, while Ethan's mother scooped him into her arms. "My grandson, how could you fall like that?" she cooed. The boy kept crying, "Grandma, Grandma," and struggled to get down. When she put him down, he kicked the osmanthus tree furiously and yelled, "Grandma, hurry up and chop this tree down. Chop it down." Then he threw himself onto the ground, rolling around as he shouted, "This tree is awful. I wish it would just wither away." I stood there in shock, unable to move, stunned by the way he kept calling her grandma. Something about the boy wasn't right. He suddenly shrieked, even lashing out and kicking Ethan's mother. My feet felt rooted to the ground, and I couldn't take a step. Ethan's mother frowned and tried to soothe him, but after a while even she lost patience. "Stop screaming, will you? What do you actually want?" she snapped. At that moment, the child suddenly lifted his head and locked eyes with me, standing half hidden among the flowers. Ethan's mother froze where she stood, her mouth opening and closing without a word. Ethan returned quickly, and when he carried the boy into the living room, I stood by the side, waiting for his explanation. The moment he saw me, he immediately put the child down. "I can explain, Sawyer," he said. The instant he spoke those words, I knew it was all true. He really did have an illegitimate son. All of our past, all of our memories, at that moment, they became nothing but a cruel joke. The boy began crying without warning, clinging to Ethan and begging him to hold him. Ethan just stared at me, his mouth slightly open. When the child got no response, he started screaming again, running wildly through the living room. With one swing of his arm, he knocked the fruit tray from the coffee table to the floor, then began slamming his head against the wall. It was clear he was not a healthy child. "There's no need to explain. Just send me the divorce papers tonight," I said, looking straight at Ethan. He glanced at the boy, then met my eyes again, his expression darkening with irritation. "So this is how you ask for a divorce? Do you even think this makes sense? You won't even hear me out? What exactly is there to explain?" I shot back. My words were drowned out by another piercing scream from the boy, his cries growing sharper and louder. I swallowed hard against the ache rising in my throat. "Ethan, what face do you have to come here and explain anything to me?" Ethan picked up the boy and fell silent. Nothing he could say would change the truth. I packed up a few things and walked out of the Carter estate. Over the next month, I consulted the best divorce lawyers. Ethan's shamelessness was plain to see. My priority was to fight for my rights. I would keep both my daughter and my share of the family business. I wouldn't leave Ethan a single thing. After washing up that evening, I received a message from the private investigator. "Miss Sawyer, Mr. Carter has hidden that woman very carefully. I tailed him for quite some time, and finally confirmed he keeps her at a standalone villa in River Garden. I'll send you the exact location. But this might not be the only place. I'll continue to investigate." I wired him $200,000 and sent a simple reply, "Please take care of this for me." Originally, I hadn't wanted things with Ethan to come to this point. We could have talked it through. We could have parted ways peacefully. A peaceful divorce. That was what I had hoped for. But Ethan refused to communicate with me. He wanted custody of our daughter, insisting he would never allow a Carter child to be raised outside of the family. I, however, would never let him have his way. Even if Grace wasn't born directly into the Carter family, with me, she would still have everything she needed. She didn't need a father like Ethan. To her, he was nothing but a stain. I drove to his assistant's residence and immediately recognized Ethan's car parked in the yard. It was his favorite vehicle, there was no mistake. His assistant, Frank, was standing outside the living room, rubbing his hands together and stomping his feet against the cold. The moment he saw me, he froze where he stood. It was bitterly cold that day. I smiled at him. I never expected that part of Assistant Frank's job description included delivering his boss to his mistress. Frank stammered, "Miss Sawyer?" In the end, he lowered his head. I had no intention of making things hard for him. After all, he was just an employee. I slipped him a card. "You have two choices. First, you can call Ethan right now. I'm sure he's told you to cover for him, but even if you do, I'll still see him, and he'll probably take it out on you. Compared to that, the second option is much better." I let out a quiet laugh. "Forget that Ethan is your boss. Let me in quietly without alerting anyone. After today, resign and come work for me. I'll pay you double." Frank hesitated only briefly before choosing the second option. I wasn't surprised. After all, the Sawyer Group's future was far brighter than the Carter's business. It would make no sense to turn down a better opportunity. When I stepped inside, I froze for a moment. The decor looked almost identical to the Carter family estate, even the furniture was the same. Ethan had always had a mild form of obsessive compulsion. He liked things to be identical. As a boy, all his stationery was always of the same brand, and if something was lost, he would replace it with the exact same item. I crept upstairs. The design there was also a copy of the Carter home. Clearly, Ethan had put a lot of effort into recreating a replica of our house. I went straight to the innermost room, the same location as the master bedroom at the estate. The door wasn't closed, and voices floated out. "Ethan, when will you marry me? I don't want to be the woman behind your back anymore. Will you marry me? You can't let our children remain illegitimate forever." The voice was soft and saccharine, dripping with sweetness. "Just wait a little longer. Don't make a fuss." Ethan soothed Emily Shen gently. "I have to secure custody of my daughter before I can file for divorce." Emily's tone turned sour. "We already have a son and a daughter of our own. Why do you need that child? Grace grew up with me and your mother watching over her. Feelings like that aren't so easy to cut off. Don't start trouble, Emily." Ethan coaxed her for a long time before she finally smiled again. "Daddy?" A little girl toddled down another hallway, barely 2 years old, with a sharp-looking middle-aged nanny following close behind, afraid she might fall. When the nanny saw me, she slapped her hand over her mouth, nearly crying out. Ethan must have heard his daughter calling because he came out, smiling. But the first person he saw wasn't his little girl, it was me. Ethan stiffened. Beside him, Frank smirked maliciously and said, "Ethan, you drove too fast. You didn't even notice something was following you." I raised my hand, ready to slap him, but Ethan was faster, blocking me. "Sawyer," he said, trying to sound composed, "you're 34. He's only 25. Of course he doesn't know how to speak properly. Why are you taking it so seriously?" I stood there, calmer than I expected. When love is gone, words lose all restraint. I just hadn't expected Ethan to throw my age in my face. I brought my hand down hard on him instead, the slap landing across his cheek with every ounce of strength I had. I hadn't held back at all. Ethan lifted his head, staring at me in shock, the bright red imprint of my slap spreading across his face. Emily Shen gasped, covering her mouth in disbelief. I had trained in self-defense since I was a child. That slap was not something easy to endure. My parents had taught me from a young age that one day I would be the sole heir to the Sawyer Group, and that I needed both strength and knowledge. Those were the essential qualities of a successful leader. I listened to them. I was captain of my school sports teams, excelled at every kind of game, mastered several languages, and ranked at the top of my class in every subject. I worked tirelessly, constantly striving to improve myself, not for anyone else's approval, but for my own. I wanted to push myself to be the best, to grow the company and fulfill its social responsibilities, to become the most outstanding and influential entrepreneur I could be. I also wanted my employees to feel proud, accomplished, and happy. I pursued perfection in everything, held myself to the strictest standards. Never was it for Ethan to use my age against me as a weapon. "Sawyer," Ethan snarled, his eyes blazing with anger. "You're insane." His assistant Frank quickly chimed in. "How could you hit Ethan like that?" But before he could finish, I slapped him too. His delicate skin swelled almost instantly on the left side of his face. I couldn't stand seeing anything asymmetrical, so I slapped his right cheek as well. Ethan's little daughter had a bold streak. Watching her father and his assistant get hit, she thought it was funny, and she started laughing. Ethan shot her a look, clearly displeased. The four of us stood frozen in a tense standoff. Then Ethan let out a cold laugh. "Sawyer, you're a lunatic," he sneered, his eyes raking over me. "Go look in the mirror and see how crazy you've become. Do you really think you're still young?" I almost laughed at that. "Ethan, maybe you should be the one looking in the mirror." He was 6 years older than me, 40 this year, though time seemed to have treated him well. His face barely showed any trace of age, but that didn't give him the right to use age as a weapon against me. When you were young, if you had made mistakes like these, you could have fathered a whole army of children already, I said coldly. Frank's face darkened with shame, but I didn't waste another word on him. Talking to people like him was pointless. I turned and walked away, but before I could get into my car, Ethan grabbed my arm. I'm not your employee, Sawyer, he said bitterly. Is this really the way you treat me? I ignored him, but he snatched my bag from my hand. Sawyer, do you even understand why we've come to this? It's because of your attitude. You're always so high and mighty, always pointing out every flaw. If you hadn't constantly criticized me, we wouldn't be here today. His eyes were bloodshot as he glared at me. What is the Sawyer family so desperate for money? Why do you always try to press me down? Do you know what people say about me out there? He nearly shouted the words. They say I'm useless, that if it weren't for your guidance, I never would have gotten this far. Tell me, what man could ever accept that? I looked at Ethan calmly, though inside my heart felt as if it were being ripped into 1,000 pieces. Just a month ago, he had carefully prepared a birthday gift for me, had held me close, and thanked me for helping him secure a government bid. And it wasn't just that, he had admitted himself that I had helped him far too many times to count. From the beginning, Ethan had been happy to sit back and reap the benefits, but now it had all turned into resentment. I stared at him. You're terrifying. I didn't know when he had become this way. Maybe what he truly despised wasn't the results themselves, but the fact that everyone knew he had achieved them because of me. Wanting everything both ways, how despicable. I yanked my bag back and kicked him hard, sending him stumbling. Do you remember what I told you the year we got married? I said that if one day you stopped loving me, don't betray me, just tell me and we'd divorce. We could part on good terms. Did you ever do that? The more I spoke, the more absurd it seemed. If you were so afraid people would think you were incapable, then why didn't you make decisions on your own? Why did you keep coming to me, again and again, asking me to solve things for you? You're the one who said I loved to play the teacher, yet you shamelessly begged me every time you hit a problem, asking me to come up with a way out. Ethan Carter, how can a man be this shameless? You don't have some sudden sense of self-awareness, you're just insecure. Frank rushed out from inside, took one look at the disheveled Ethan, and stepped in front of him. Touch him again, and see what happens. Do you really think Ethan won't fight back? Will he? I said coldly, not bothering to hide my disdain. If he were going to, he would have already done it. It's not that he doesn't want to, it's that his body is worn out from booze and women. Even if he tried, he couldn't. I got into my car and drove off, not wanting to waste another second on the two of them. In the car, my thoughts churned. To say I felt no regret would be a lie. Ethan and I hadn't exactly been childhood sweethearts, but we had known each other from a young age. Our social circle was small, and even if our families weren't particularly close, we had crossed paths many times. Ethan had taken over his family's company at 26, after returning from abroad. His parents had groomed him as heir since childhood, so this path was always his destiny. Like everyone expected, he came in with force and authority, quickly establishing his control and impressing everyone. But it didn't last. Without his parents' constant supervision, the company soon ran into trouble. Ethan fired an employee whose mistake had cost the company millions, but that employee retaliated. He happened to be a small-time influencer and uploaded a video about how he'd been too worried about his child to focus at work, which had led to his dismissal. In that video, he cleverly glossed over the actual losses he had caused, instead painting himself as a victim of a company that lacked compassion, firing someone just for being distracted on the job. The video blew up, gaining him over 200,000 followers in a short time. The Carter Company didn't respond quickly to manage public opinion, and the truth was buried under wave after wave of sympathy. By the time Ethan tried to address it, the situation had already exploded. As the acting head, Ethan was being dodged and criticized everywhere, and the company's reputation suffered badly. Every attempt to clarify the truth was twisted into claims that Ethan was a bully, forcing employees to apologize. Just as Ethan was being pushed to the eye of the storm, I attended one of their morning meetings. My father had some shares in the Carter Company, though he never really participated, he only collected dividends. From the time I was little, he always brought me along, teaching me and letting me experience the world of business firsthand. By the time I turned 18, he had transferred to me shares from many of his companies, including some in the Carter's firm. When that meeting ended, everyone else left except for Ethan and me. He knew who I was and greeted me first. "Miss Sawyer, what brings you here? When did you return to the country?" I smiled, stood up and shook his hand. "It's been a while. Looks like President Carter isn't doing too well today." Ethan gave a rueful laugh and admitted it, and I laughed too, thinking he had an unusually good temper. Back then, he was very young, his whole being filled with the desire to conquer the world. And yet, because he was so young, there was still a scholarly air he hadn't shed. When I brought up that male employee's case, Ethan's face carried a hint of resistance. "Miss Sawyer, since when have you been so interested in our company's affairs?" "Because I'm a shareholder," I answered naturally. "Of course I want Carter Corp to do well. After all, it concerns my dividends at the end of the year." 20 years old? Ethan chuckled, glancing at me again. "You can't have graduated yet. Why are you back? Taking a gap year?" "I've graduated," I replied calmly. "I went abroad when I was 16. Of course I've graduated by now." Ethan looked a little surprised and asked what school I had attended. "Cornell University," I said, "our shared alma mater." Hearing that, Ethan relaxed, the distance between us fading. He began chatting about campus stories and then asked, "Why did you choose Cornell?" "My parents fell in love there," I told him. "I thought it was meaningful, so I went. Once I had that in mind, it became my only choice." Ethan smiled and explained his own reasoning, saying he had chosen Cornell for its culture. When the topic shifted to the company, he grew animated, speaking rapidly about his ideas and then asking eagerly if I had time to join him for a meal to continue discussing things. I turned down his suggestion of an upscale restaurant and instead proposed we eat at the company cafeteria. A cafeteria reflected employee welfare and corporate culture, and I was interested in seeing that. Back then, I was still young, my thinking lively and restless. My parents had always told me to learn from the people in our circle, so I took the chance to explore the city and fill in the gaps in my own understanding. If you only examined your own company, it was easy to look at it through rose-colored glasses, hard to see its flaws. It was better to look outward. Besides, Ethan was no fool. I couldn't let one public opinion crisis make me dismiss his capabilities altogether. I was more than willing to learn something from him. Overall, that meal was pleasant enough. Ethan was very polite, even asking me for advice on handling the public opinion scandal. He shared his own ideas first. He had two plans. One was to let it fade, believing that the truth would speak for itself. If the public still refused to believe the company's clarification, then ignore it. Once the hype died down, people would stop talking about it. The second plan was to bring the employee back and have him stop smearing the company. When he finished, I was stunned, almost questioning whether he had truly studied the same major as I had at the same school. Both methods seemed flawed. In the gentlest tone I could manage, I said, "Isn't the first plan a little too passive? For a company, reputation is everything. It's the backbone of how the public perceives you. The best time for clarification has already passed. Should we really let things drag on? Letting the scandal die on its own is the most passive choice. That approach usually works only for lesser-known matters, things that won't come up again if they're never brought to light a second time. But President Carter, your company needs exposure. It's like advertising for your product. A business can't be afraid of the spotlight. If you just let the dismissal incident pass, won't Carter Corp be planting a time bomb? If a competitor deliberately digs it up later, it will only be harder to deal with." Ethan quickly dismissed his first idea. I continued on to his second. If someone makes a serious mistake and still benefits from it, President Carter, don't you think other employees will feel resentful or even try to imitate him? That man smeared the company to win public sympathy, shifting blame and openly challenging his employer. If such behavior becomes an example, you'll face more negative headlines. Worse, the company has already been painted as guilty in the public's eyes. If you take him back now, it will only confirm everyone's suspicions. People will think, if the company did nothing wrong, why would they bow their heads? Ethan nodded repeatedly, agreeing with my analysis. Encouraged, he pressed me for a better solution. I told him mine. Get to the bottom of the matter, investigate thoroughly, and reverse the narrative. At first, of course, Some people will cling to their view, refusing to believe any clarification, convinced it's just another game of capital. For people like that, even if you put the evidence right in front of their faces, they would still lie with their eyes wide open, refusing to believe. That's why if you're going to clarify, you have to do it thoroughly. We should call the police, make everything public, both the facts and the evidence, and expose the full extent of the losses that man caused the company. And this matter also needed to be tackled from the man himself. I paused for a moment. A few days earlier, I had noticed some revelations in the comments section under his videos. They had since been deleted, but at the time I thought they sounded highly credible, so I hired someone to investigate. It turned out those claims were true. That employee was nothing like he pretended to be, a single father raising a child on his own. His whole story was a fabrication. He had divorced his wife because he cheated on her, and he had refused to pay child support for his daughter. He would rather gamble than give his ex-wife the money. Tell me, who would believe a man like that when he said he was distracted at work out of worry for his child? When Ethan heard this, he became so excited, he leapt to his feet and thanked me profusely. I didn't think much of it. In fact, I felt he was overreacting. To me, this had been a very small issue. It hadn't taken much effort at all. The only reason I got involved wasn't because I liked playing the teacher, but simply because I loved solving public opinion crises. They gave me experience. If I hadn't had such a massive family business waiting for me to inherit, I probably would have worked in the PR department of an entertainment company. That way I could have handled endless crises like this. Ethan immediately asked his secretary to reach out to that employee's ex-wife and daughter to have them testify. I handed him a number. President Carter, you can just call this directly. I've already explained the situation to them. They're willing to testify. Ethan looked at me with renewed respect once again. A few days later, Ethan invited me to dinner a second time. We discussed measures to reform the company, starting with implementing genuine, humane corporate policies, extending paid maternity leave for female employees, granting paternity leave for male employees so they could share childcare duties. This way, employees would feel supported from all sides. Not only would it improve the company's reputation, but it would also nurture an invisible base of future customers for Carter products. Ethan gradually adopted every one of my suggestions, and I implemented them in my own company as well. When both of our corporations gained recognition and praise for their employee care policies, even receiving official coverage, Ethan proposed to me. At 22, I said yes. At the time, I truly believed that for the next 50 years, we would remain loving partners in both marriage and business. Looking back now, it feels ridiculous. Because before we even reached the so-called 7-year itch, Ethan was already cheating. And I had no idea. That was my blindness, my naive optimism, my foolish belief that feelings could remain unchanged forever. During those countless nights when Ethan betrayed me, I imagine he looked down on me with disdain and contempt. Later, perhaps he even thought I would never discover it. 7 years, he managed to hide it from me for 7 whole years. Now when I think back, I don't even know why I was with him in the first place. I never thought he had any true business talent. He trapped me in the name of love, and I trapped myself too. I should have been sharper, more vigilant. Dawn was breaking, and I didn't go home. I went straight to the office. On the way, I sent a message to the nanny who looked after Grace, reminding her to make lotus seed soup for breakfast. Then I considered whether I should let Grace take a break from school, give her some time to rest at home. After thinking it over, I decided to wait until she woke up. I thought about calling Grace to ask her opinion. Even though she was still young, I had always respected her thoughts. She had always loved going to school, loved learning new things, competitive and ambitious just like I had been at her age, determined to excel in everything. But when she was 7 and became obsessed with Sudoku, I actually felt a little afraid. I secretly asked everyone in the family if anyone had been pressuring her to study, but everyone denied it. Left with no choice, I went straight to Grace, who had been bent over her puzzles for 3 straight hours without lifting her head. Her answer was simple: she was interested. She told me she was curious about everything. Every skill fascinated her. She said she wanted to be like me, Straight A's, broad interests, advancing grades ahead of schedule. There was no other reason. She just wanted to resemble me more. A child being ambitious from such a young age is indeed a good thing, but my heart ached for her. When it was me, I had thought all of that was normal, but watching my daughter take on so much, I worried she was putting too much pressure on herself. From the moment she was born, my only wish for her was to live happily and joyfully. Yet somehow I had given birth to a miniature version of myself. I watched Grace closely for a long time, keeping her company whenever I could, until finally my worries eased. She really was a child who seemed destined to repay kindness. Her personality was excellent. She was polite, quick-witted, and remarkably patient. Not just with schoolwork, but with everything she tried. She picked things up faster than most. She learned tennis in an hour. She was always far ahead of kids her age in running. She even wanted to learn martial arts and rock climbing. So, Ethan and I let her try. At first we worried she might be afraid, but soon we saw how much she enjoyed it. That's when I finally felt reassured. Grace stayed with my parents for half a year. They loved her so much they hated to send her back to the Carter estate. They always said Grace was my mini version, identical to me as a child. One day, Ethan's mother was waiting outside my office building. The moment she saw me, she broke down crying. "How can you just take Grace away? She's the child I've raised. She's a Carter child. How dare you take her?" She sobbed harder, her words tumbling out. "And that so-called grandson Ethan brought back last month? All he does is cry, hit people. He's nothing like Grace. He's not even close to her. I want to take Grace home." I ignored her and headed toward my meeting, but she blocked me. "Sawyer, are you really going to divorce? If you don't divorce, everything in the Carter family will one day be Grace's." I drew in a long breath. Even if we divorce, if Grace ever wants Carter Corp., I can get it for her anytime. Acquiring a company has never been a problem for me. From the very beginning, I knew the Sawyer Group would outgrow the Carters. That's why Ethan and I signed a prenuptial agreement before marriage, separating our assets completely. Each of us manages our own finances, no overlap. That way, he can't touch a cent of mine now. As for what little he does have, I may not care for it, but when it comes to Grace's share, I'll fight for every bit. None of it will ever go to his illegitimate children. As for the future, I would simply watch as Ethan dragged his company down, step by step, until the capital chain collapsed and he was forced to declare bankruptcy. When that time came, I would step in. The so-called Carter Corp. Could serve as an early training ground for my daughter. I looked at Ethan's mother. Back then, she had always wanted me and Ethan to have another child. Even after we made it clear that Grace would be our only daughter, she never gave up. But as Grace grew older and proved to be an easy, delightful child, she fell in love with her completely. No matter what it was, if it involved Grace, she wanted to handle it herself. Grace was clingy, always sticking close to anyone who cared for her, and that only deepened her grandmother's attachment. Whenever Grace wasn't in school, her grandmother insisted on taking her everywhere. Even when meeting old friends for afternoon tea, she insisted on bringing Grace along. Afterward, she would take her to the amusement park to play for a while. She was afraid that if she bragged too much about Grace's brilliance, it would spark envy or gossip. So she forced herself to change her old habit of showing off. Starting from the second year she raised Grace, she stopped pressing me to give Ethan another child. Sometimes, when her old friends sighed that it was a pity Grace wasn't a boy, she would speak up immediately, telling them to mind their own business, declaring that even 100 grandsons could not compare to Grace. Thinking about it now made my chest tighten. For all those years, I truly wanted to believe her love for Grace was real, heartfelt. After all, anyone can put on an act for a while, but faking it for 10 years is nearly impossible. Yet when the truth about Ethan's illegitimate son came out, she still hesitated. Just like Ethan himself, the balance in her heart shifted. I knew she wanted Grace, after raising her for 10 years. Of course there were deep feelings, but I had reason to believe that if Ethan's son had been as bright, as well-mannered, as clever as Grace, she would have abandoned her too. In the end, his fight for Grace was nothing more than a calculation, love measured against gain and loss. But Grace never needed that kind of conditional love, and I would never make decisions for her. Whatever path she chose, it would be her choice. Ethan and I finally completed the entire divorce process. I hired movers to take all the important books and documents out of my study. Ethan stood in the doorway, looking oddly satisfied, like he had finally gotten the upper hand, watching as I carried out the last few antique reprint volumes. "Sawyer," he said calmly, his voice feigning generosity, "no matter how capable you are, you still couldn't keep your marriage." His tone was measured, even magnanimous, but I knew inside he was unraveling. Otherwise, he wouldn't have made a point to come here. He thought he was here to humiliate me, but all I saw was a man forcing a performance to hide the emptiness and jealousy rotting inside him. I smiled at him. "Ethan Carter, just wait and see. Fortune turns, and when it turns against you, it crushes hard." He wouldn't be smiling for long. Leaving this marriage wouldn't hurt me. In fact, it was a blessing. A fortunate woman doesn't belong in an unfortunate household. It was Ethan who had lost me, and I would watch to see just how long he could keep laughing. A wise person knows themselves. Unfortunately, he never did. "You can't compare to Emily at all," Ethan sneered. "She's gentle, kind, attentive. She makes me hangover soup when I'm drunk, ties my tie before meetings, even washes my underwear while carrying my child. That's what a real wife does. But you? A domineering woman like you will never get real love." I kicked him hard in the waist, forcing him back several steps. He lifted his head, glaring at me with pure hatred. "Did I ever stop you from fighting back?" I asked indifferently. "Your assistant is attentive because his livelihood depends on you. But between us, weren't you the one always running to me for help? If we're going by your logic, shouldn't it have been you doing these thoughtful things for me? Why have I never seen you fulfill your duty? You call me domineering, but isn't it only because I had a useless husband? For a wife, strength becomes a necessity." I sighed. "What choice did I have, when fate gave me a husband like you?" I was 5'10", always keeping up my fitness. Ethan, 6 foot even, hadn't had abs in years. Standing there now with his waist bent, he looked even more worn down, defeated. It almost made me look condescending, but the truth was obvious. No brains, no strength, no wonder he was so insecure. I couldn't help but sigh from the heart. "Ethan, someone like you isn't even fit to be a decorative pillow." I clicked my tongue twice. "After all, age is catching up with you. No matter how you insult me, it won't hide the fact that you're utterly dependent on your mistress." Ethan, blind to danger, shot back. "You really think you're that special?" I met his eyes and spoke clearly, word by word. "I am an international-level track athlete, a first-class swimmer, a first-class diver, a first-class wrestler. Since I was a child, I've won every kind of academic competition. Year after year, I was an outstanding student. I won gold medals in the physics and chemistry Olympiads. Later, when I studied abroad, I graduated with straight A's. I double-majored in physics and mathematics. And you, what do you have? What exactly do you think gives you the right to look down on me? What would I ever need to feel insecure about? Tell me one way in which you could possibly compare. At 40 years old, when trouble comes, the only thing you know how to do is run home to your wife. What qualification do you have to despise me?" My voice grew calmer the more I spoke. "Ethan Carter, men like you, with no ambition, yet overflowing with pride, deserve to achieve nothing. Remember, it was you who came to me back then. I never begged you to marry me. So don't look at me with that expression, as if you were the prize and I was desperate. If I had the chance to choose again, I wouldn't give you a second glance. Even if you were the one marrying into my family, you still wouldn't be worthy. The fact that you've been with me for over 10 years is already more than you deserved. Without me, you know perfectly well what would have become of your company. Without me, who would still call you President Carter? Take a good look in the mirror. Why is it that after all these years, people still call you my husband instead of calling me your wife? Why has no one ever thought I lived off you? Isn't that enough proof? It means you're worthless." By the end, my voice wasn't even raised. I simply laid out the facts. In every aspect, you're nothing. You can't out-negotiate me. You can't outlast me physically. Your thinking is rigid and inflexible. What do you have that's worth showing off? Back then, being with you was your fortune, Ethan, not mine. At that, his mother finally lost all composure. She collapsed to the floor, sobbing, throwing away years of elegance and dignity. How could you speak so viciously? How could you be so cruel? You don't respect your husband at all. Even if he has no great accomplishments, you can't belittle him like that. He's a man, he can't lose face like this. Mom, Ethan called to her, bristling with indignation. What do you mean I have nothing? Where exactly am I lacking? But his mother ignored him and went on condemning me for destroying her son's dignity. Her silence to his protest was as good as an admission. Even she, who had always defended him, could see now that Ethan's so-called achievements had depended on me. And yet he still thought all those years of success were his own doing. How delusional. I didn't bother taking her words to heart. In her mind, whenever it came to her son, everyone else was the enemy. Since that was the case, I felt no obligation to show her any respect. She probably didn't know how many debate prizes I had collected since childhood. If scolding her son alone was too much for her to bear, I had no problem dragging her into it too. I gathered up my antique books and walked downstairs, while Frank the assistant stood there like some MVP at the end of a game, watching me claim my spoils of war. Dressed in flashy clothes, clutching that unstable son of hers, Emily Shen strutted in front of me, her chin high as if she had won. I didn't need to ask why she was here. It was clearly to flaunt herself. But I had no patience for her empty bragging, so I turned away before she could speak. You love showing off so much? Then work harder and secure yourself a real position before you flaunt it. What's the point now? A mistress parading around with an illegitimate child? That's hardly something to be proud of. Come back when you've truly married into wealth, then you can brag. Frank's voice cracked as he shouted at me. You've gone too far. You're not young anymore, and you're still this arrogant, no wonder. His words trailed off as his face crumpled, tears spilling. I only sneered. She was ordinary enough already, and crying just made the cheap cosmetic work on her face even more obvious. As for Ethan, he really had no originality at all, always dragging age into every insult. I laughed. So I'm 9 years older than you? That makes me ancient? What, you won't even live that long yourself? Or when 9 years pass, are you planning to just die on the spot? I brushed past them. Sorry, I've always been this bold. I was born bold. And in front of people like you, why should I hide it? Oh, by the way, do you know Ethan brags about you upstairs, calling you his delicate little wife, washing his underwear for him? That must make you so happy, right? He must really love you, handing even his underwear over to you. I leaned closer, my words sharp. But tell me, do you think he's with you because he admires you, or because you're so incompetent that he can feel superior in your shadow? I left quickly after that, determined never to set foot there again. The next time I heard about Ethan was 2 years later. I was busy investing in several emerging industries when my best friend called me again and again. Do you know Ethan and his mistress were taken in for investigation? What happened? I asked, suddenly wide awake. The exhaustion of days spent in back-to-back meetings and poring over documents vanished instantly. I already had some idea of Ethan's situation. After our divorce, he overhauled his company's policies completely. He canceled all the benefits, enforced the 9-to-96 work culture, encouraged endless competition, and pressured employees not to leave after hours. Unsurprisingly, it sparked outrage within the company. At the same time, he went on multiple shows preaching his philosophy, even criticizing longtime employees as deadweight who only knew how to flatter their superiors. His reputation plummeted. People openly called him greasy and repulsive. He also made a point of mentioning me in public, challenging me, and trying to compete in terms of management ability. I never acknowledged him, always treating him like the clown he was. With talent being driven out of his company, I was more than happy to scoop up the excellent employees he had cast aside, growing Sawyer Group by another tier. Later, I heard he even fought physically with several of his executives over conflicting ideas. I couldn't be bothered to follow the details. I just ignored him. But now, hearing that he had ruined himself this quickly, I was intrigued. What exactly happened? I asked my friend. Didn't his company already tank? He's been suppressed by competitors all year and barely turned a profit, she explained breathlessly. His mistress, Emily Shen, kept making trouble, saying he was incompetent. At first, Ethan tolerated her, but then she used that unruly son she had given him as a weapon, mocking him in front of his friends until he couldn't lift his head. So Ethan found himself a younger woman on the side. Emily was furious. They fought daily, tearing each other apart. Ethan no longer mentions his promises to marry her. And Emily, she's even worse. She convinced herself their son is so slow because Ethan didn't send him to a private academy. Under encouragement from Ethan's rivals, she embezzled company funds. Now both of them have been taken away for investigation. Hearing this, I felt exhilarated. Ethan had truly not disappointed me. He hadn't made me wait long at all. I picked up the phone and called my secretary, Hannah. Announced to the company that this month every employee's bonus will be tripled, and schedule a meeting for tomorrow morning. Yes, President Sawyer, Hannah replied, her voice unable to hide her joy. What's the meeting about? It's about acquiring my ex-husband's company, I said coolly. Let's make sure he ends up penniless. She answered quickly, and I hung up. As the saying goes, when one man falls, the world piles on. Everything happening to Ethan Carter now, he deserved every bit of it. 2 months later, the acquisition was complete. Carter Corp., once trumpeted as Ethan's empire, was swallowed into Sawyer Group like a pebble sinking into the ocean. His name disappeared from the headlines, replaced by mine, and those who once praised him now avoided eye contact, pretending they had never known him. Grace stood beside me on the day the deal was finalized. She held my hand and smiled with the calm composure of someone far older than her years. "Mom," she whispered, "I'm proud of you." In that moment, I realized everything I had endured, all the betrayal, humiliation, and pain, was worth it. Because she understood. Because she chose me. As for Ethan, he faded into the background, a man who had once been given everything and squandered it all. And Emily Shen? She became just another forgotten scandal, a cautionary tale people whispered about over coffee before moving on to the next. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to. True victory was never about revenge, it was about freedom. Walking out of that marriage hadn't broken me, it had set me free. I had my daughter, my company, and my future. And so I closed that chapter of my life without looking back. Ethan Carter had been a mistake, but one I would never repeat. The road ahead was mine alone, and I would walk it with Grace at my side. Together we would build a life where no one, not betrayal, not envy, not weakness, could ever touch us again. That was the true ending, not his downfall, but our beginning.